Now, I would kindly like to ask the moderator for our panel what I think will be some very interesting discussion of both what we've heard and some new ideas. Our moderator, Dr. Jeffrey Gresh, and also the panelists of our first panel, Admiral Shohei Ishii, and also Rear Admiral Wayne Gwyn Jr., if they could make their way to this stage. Thank you very much. This will deal with current security situation on the sea lanes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks very much for the introductory remarks, for the opportunity to be here, JITTI and the Reischauer Center. It's a real honor to be able to moderate this first panel. We have two distinguished guests today, Admiral Shohei Ishii, the former Commandant of the Japan Coast Guard, and Rear Admiral Wayne Argeen, the Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy at the U.S. Coast Guard. The way we'll proceed is each of them will provide around 5-minute remarks, and then I have a series of questions. Some were already planted ahead of time upon registration, and then if there's time, we'll open it up, but unfortunately, that might not be likely at this point, just so we can try to remain on schedule. So with that being said, Admiral Ishii, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gresh. My name is Shohei Ishii. I was Commandant of the Japan Coast Guard until this July. First of all, I would like to express my deepest condolences for the enormous loss and damage caused by Hurricane Helen. Also, I would like to pay my utmost respect for all those who have been engaged in life-saving and recovery efforts under extremely difficult circumstances, including the U.S. Coast Guard. It's a great honor for me to invite to such a timely and therefore significant symposium. Perhaps you expect the Coast Guard to play an important role in ensuring the safety of sea lanes. So first, I would like to introduce the Japan Coast Guard's efforts for international cooperation. The Japan Coast Guard was established in 1948, shortly after World War II. It was modeled after and advised by the U.S. Coast Guard, which has a wide range of missions, including maritime security, maritime rescue, environmental protection, disaster relief, and traffic safety. On the other hand, unlike the USCG, the JCG is a non-military law enforcement agency and does not have a military mission. Japan is surrounded by the sea on all sides, and in terms of maritime area, which combines territorial waters and EEZs. Japan ranks 6th in the world, since it shares maritime borders with its neighbors. The security of its territorial waters is also JCG's important mission. Especially in recent years, the China Coast Guard's intrusion of the Japanese territorial waters around the Senkaku Islands has become a regular occurrence. In response, the Japanese government has strengthened its maritime security capabilities, including increasing the JCG's vessels and aircrafts. The Japan Coast Guard is promoting international cooperation among other Coast Guard agencies to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific. As for bilateral frameworks, the U.S. Coast Guard has been and continues to be a key partner. a memorandum of understanding was expanded in 2022. As for multilateral frameworks, the JCG has established all of these worldwide or regional forums, which are Coast Guard Global Summit, North Pacific Coast Guard Forum, and Heads of Asian Coast Guard Agency meeting. The JCG would like to continue to actively commit to these international contributions. In the fight against piracy, since 2009, Japan has dispatched self-defense forces vessels with JCG law enforcement officials on board to the waters of the coast of Somalia and the Gulf of Aden, which are major shipping lanes from Europe to Japan. Also, the JCG has sent vessels and aircraft to the countries in the Indo-Pacific to conduct maritime patrols and enhance its presence in the region. In addition, the JCG has contributed its staff to the RECAP ISC, an international organization for counter-piracy in Asia. In terms of capacity building assistance for other Coast Guard agencies, the JCG launched the Mobile Cooperation Team in 2017. Currently, the team has 18 members and provides capacity building assistance to countries in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in Southeast Asia. The total number of dispatch so far expands 100. Also this year, the JCG started a full-scale effort in the Micronesian nations, which are Palau, Federal States of Micronesia, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands, in cooperation with the US and Australia. Lastly, in recent years, new multilateral frameworks have been established to promote a maritime order based on the rule of law. Various cooperative efforts are already underway in US, Japan, Philippines, US, Japan, ROK, and Quad. The JCG will commit to cooperation efforts through these frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vice Admiral Arguin, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dresch and Admiral Ishii, and distinguished friends and partners. Thank you for the opportunity to represent Coast Guard interests in this very important symposium. Many people don't know that the U.S. Coast Guard is a global Coast Guard. We've operated in every ocean, every sea for a number of years, and continue to expand our footprint principally within the Indo-Pacific of late. And it's important to sort of paint a picture of the cooperation that we maintain with the Japan Coast Guard, but with other partners within the region as well. When I think about supply chain fragility, I always come back to what we describe as the triple challenge. Ships are getting larger, they're becoming more complex, everybody wants more of the things that we buy, and that puts increasing pressure on a supply chain that is arguably relatively fragile. There's a number of things that can cause any number of disruptions within the supply chain, and sea lane security is probably one of those most essential elements of the entire supply chain that must be predictable so that industries can identify where they're going to be able to move their cargoes effectively and safely. That supply chain fragility you've heard about across the board. Each one of the speakers talked about all of the different things that could influence a disruption in supply chains, geopolitics, the interconnectedness, cyber, as things become more and more complex, mariner shortages, and the stability of those sea lanes are all things that could at any given moment cause a disruption in supply chain that will negatively influence economic prosperity and national security. The Coast Guard's role in the Indo-Pacific is to continue to strengthen those partnerships through training, through joint operations, and through an enduring presence. We continue to push our Coast Guard cutters and our teams, mobile training teams, into the region to provide shared interest to expand those partnerships, to share information, and ensure that each of our unique capabilities provide for an expanded force multiplier to demonstrate rules-based order, to reinforce norms from an international perspective, and ensure that the mariners that go to sea are able to do so safely, securely, and be able to get home to their families while performing that mission. And freedom of navigation is, in fact, an essential element of any shipping industry. Without the predictability of having freedom of navigation, the ability for shippers to determine when they're going to be able to deliver a cargo, how they're going to be able to deliver that cargo, it falls off the table pretty quickly. We strive from a U.S. Coast Guard perspective to maintain being that partner of choice, looking for opportunities to share our lessons learned, to expand maritime domain awareness so that we can be that force multiplier in a vast region, and so that those partner nations are able to defend their own economic security, to evaluate their ability to expand partnerships not only with the U.S., but with other like-minded nations. Maritime governance, at its essence, is a country's ability to defend its own economic potential, to be able to ensure that each of those opportunities are expanded, and when individuals don't choose to follow those international norms, that there is accountability. And that really is the essence of maritime governance, demonstrating a predictable, reliable way to ensure that what happens on the seas are understood, safe, and secure. I mentioned information sharing. At the end of the day, if we can expand the opportunities for individuals and individual countries to understand where their threats are, we can make better choices about where ships should go, what we can be doing to ensure that those ships can enter those areas safely, and then ensure that, that national economies and international commerce can be done from a safe and secure perspective, and also ensuring that those mariners that go to sea are able to do so safely and securely. So thank you.
Thanks very much. So perhaps I'll open up with 2 points that both of you mentioned, and perhaps could have you kind of drill down into this idea. And I appreciated the slide, Admiral Ishii, and certainly the mention, Vice Admiral Agin, related to the MCTs. But I wonder if each of you could speak more to, you know, one critical element, as you both mentioned, is capacity building measures. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about some of the vision and also current activities, whether it's in Southeast Asia, but also in the Indian Ocean as well, in terms of what the U.S. Coast Guard is doing and the Japan Coast Guard is doing in both those realms. Admiral Ishii.
Yes. Well, first of all, in terms of the coastal nations, the capacity buildings in these nations, thus far, the Japan Coast Guard have been supporting in various ways of these coastal nations in terms of capacity building. That being said, the vision itself really was based on the individual nation. There was no overarching vision per se. However, recently, with the free and open Indo-Pacific concept between the U.S. and Japan, this notion has become really important. So, based on that, to provide the support based on this notion is something that we have been able to do. And I just as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, this was something that started between two countries. Then it expanded to multilateral, and then there will be more like a mini-lateral fashion. And I mentioned earlier Philippines, South Korea, and other countries where we have been able to provide a cooperation in these coastal nations.
Very much.
So maybe I'll provide a little different sort of perspective. From the Coast Guard's perspective, our international affairs team really looks to partner with nations and try to meet them where they are. Rather than coming in and saying, here's what you ought to do, we come in and ask, what do you need? What is it that you need from us or that we can provide to you that would help support you reinforcing, strengthening your own ability to defend your own exclusive economic zone, to enhance your maritime governance? We can provide a variety of different training opportunities that can be how you can or train folks to take care of their engines, for example, or how to perform a law enforcement boarding. We've provided legal teams that can come in and help reinforce the legal frameworks that would hold individuals accountable when they breach those international norms. So there's a variety of different tools that are available, and it's not just from the U.S. or U.S. government, U.S. Coast Guard. It's relying on those partners and being able to take advantage of each of our strengths and be able to learn from each other, pass on best practices, and then understand where you need to be, what you're interested in, and then be able to provide that as a supplementing force package.
So I'm wondering if both of you, in that regard, the training programs, these initiatives, meeting countries where they're at with their capabilities and the like, what are some of the challenges that you've faced when trying to implement some of these various capacity building measures?
Thank you. In terms of the Southeast Asia capacity building, we really have been focusing our efforts in this area. But for instance, in Philippines, towards Philippines, we really have been focusing a lot on this country, but also to other countries. There is some variety in terms of how much work we have put into. So I believe that perhaps more of a universal support might need to be taken or provided. But in terms of meeting where they're at, I think this is really important. But perhaps we also need to meet where they are in terms of their level. I'm trying to find a really sensitive way to say this, but perhaps there are certain nations that are not quite at the global standard level yet, but we would like to help them so that they can reach a higher level that can meet the global standard. And additionally, for Japan, just as I mentioned earlier, Southeast Asia countries were our focus in terms of our support, but also in the South Asia, and just as I mentioned earlier, and also Pacific Island nations are the areas that we are expanding our support to, because these are the important areas in terms of sea lane security. So I believe that there are more efforts that need to be provided here.
So maybe a couple of things. One, on the information sharing front, being able to share certain levels of information may not be easily done, not necessarily from a language barrier, but from a capabilities perspective. Being able to push information in real time that can be useful for operational decision making. The capabilities within a particular nation may not be where our technology is, and trying to find a creative solution to ensure that information is deliberate, it is used for tactical purposes, it has been a challenge. I would say capabilities across the board. Some nations may not have, to the Admiral's point, may not have access to surface assets and a workforce that is capable of doing some of the things to protect their own interests, and being able to build that capacity quickly, it can be a challenge. And then just maybe a little bit selfishly from a Coast Guard, we're a small service. And I have not run into a single engagement where somebody said we don't need any more Coast Guard. There's always a demand signal, and so trying to provide the right capabilities and skill sets from our own workforce for a growing demand continues to pressurize our ability to deliver that service.
So I'm curious, actually, that sort of raises an issue, which we haven't talked a lot about, is port security. Because both of you, both services, the JCG, the U.S. Coast Guard is heavily involved in an important component of that. I wonder if you could each comment on what you're doing in that regard, especially when it comes to allies and partners.
So I can start that one, sir. So I have a full team of international port security assessors that follow the rules and norms established by the International Maritime Organization under the ISPIS program. And so we provide teams that will do reciprocal visits going into our trading partners to ensure that those countries are in fact meeting the international standard. And then we do reciprocal visits. So we bring that same country over to the United States and then show them how we protect our own ports. And that's a great opportunity to share best practices across the board. And there's an incentive to do that. If you aren't implementing the international norms, then there are restrictions that are placed on you to be able to trade in the United States. And so there's incentive to understand that. And so being able to do that sort of not only capacity building, but checks and balances, meeting international standards is something that I've got an entire team that focuses on.
Thank you very much. Partnership and also cooperation among countries is definitely important. And then when it comes to protection of ports and also security of ports, is definitely we need to think about international standards. So for example, the IMO has been working on this regard. Japan, MLIT, and also JCG have been the stakeholders in this one. So everyone brings specialized knowledge, and also we work together with other countries to establish and also maintain standards. So that is the part of international cooperation. So of course we need to implement them correctly as well.
Fair enough. Speaking of the collaboration, I wonder if both of you could now speak to, certainly the U.S.-Japan alliance is so critical and valuable, perhaps, coming to new and heightened levels. What's going on at the bilateral level between the United States Coast Guard and the Japanese Coast Guard? What are some of the initiatives that are ongoing that you could kind of speak to? But I guess furthermore, looking out to the future, what is your, hope and desire to see the two forces doing more of in a combined and joint manner?
Well, I think arguably more of the same, but just more of it. I think we have, I wouldn't say that we've exhausted every possible opportunity to strengthen partnerships and to look for different ways to enhance maritime security. I think one place that is probably going to be emerging will be cybersecurity, understanding how best to address cybersecurity and the impacts. A cyber incident, unlike maybe a more traditional maritime casualty, will have cascading effects that will wrap around the world potentially in seconds. And that's an impact that could have global supply chain impacts if we aren't establishing a regularly elevated level of protection of our networks and of our systems, especially as ships become more interconnected, more connected to shoreside, more relying on technology. The ability to disrupt that technology is something that we need to be heightened and focused on.
Regarding cooperation between the United States and also Japan in terms of Coast Guard, so of course we'd like to do more. I mentioned this during my presentation. U.S. and Japanese Coast Guards definitely established with the aspect of the same model, and so the Japanese Coast Guard has been working on catching up with the U.S. Coast Guard. So I think we've come to a point that we are now shoulder to shoulder with the United States Coast Guard colleagues. So it is such an honor that we have been working together with the United States. And then also Coast Guard between the United States and then also U.S. and Japan. So we do have a MOU. This was signed in 2010. So I mentioned that this has been revised and also expanded in 2022. So based on that MOU, we have been working on bilateral cooperation. There are so many initiatives in that. So not just in the United States and Japan, we do have a unilateral cooperation. So we have involved South Korea. And so we'd like to expand this kind of regard a little bit much more. So we mentioned the Quad and also India. So India is going to be a big stakeholder in our cooperation in the future. And so what we have been doing is that, of course, cyber, you mentioned that earlier. MDA is also an important topic. So we collect information and we share that with Coast Guard agencies. This is really important to have this for the security of sea lanes. When it comes to maritime security and also safety, so we do have to think about the military aspect of it, but as a law enforcement agency, I think that we have an enlarged role in this regard. So of course, we'd like to continue working together with the U.S. Coast Guard, and then also we'd like to be the leaders of international cooperation.
You mentioned at the end the military, which kind of brings up another question, which I'd like to ask is, in one of the things I've sort of come across, and I understand it's a sensitive topic to say the least, in that the Japan Coast Guard is a law enforcement agency. But I'm curious, especially, one of the things in the United States, Department of Defense, we promote and push jointness between all the different forces. In a given warfight or given scenario, the forces can come together in kind of a joint command and control structure. I'm curious to hear, and perhaps on the U.S. Coast Guard side too, about the possibility or what's being done to kind of promote the increase and improvement or enhancement of the relationship between the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Forces and that of the Japan Coast Guard. But also on the U.S. side, what the U.S. Coast Guard is doing in conjunction with the Navy, especially in East Asia, in conjunction with those forces as well.
So from a Coast Guard perspective, I have to say this. We are the hard nucleus about which the Navy forms in times of war. And we have a long-standing relationship with our DoD partners. We speak, we call it speaking purple, right? We can speak both from an industry perspective, but we can also speak through sort of the DoD lens. And so that's a unique role that we play. We can sort of keep both feet in both camps. And I think that's a place where we can assist Japan Coast Guard with how do you navigate that, because it can get a little bit challenging, especially, and at least from my perspective, there are real reasons to keep the Coast Guard doing Coast Guard stuff and real reasons to let the Navy do Navy stuff. But there's some seams there that we've got to be able to communicate, especially in a contested environment. And so we are working that not only within the U.S., but then also how do you operate jointly with international partners? And so continuing to move the needle on that is an area where we'll continue to work.
Thank you, Japanese Coast Guard. So I mentioned this during my presentation. So we are a non-military organization. That is our most unique factor. And because this has been established after the end of World War II, and then of course that we are in an era that we cannot just make that distinction and then not touch on military aspect of our risks. And then, so there are many risks that might disrupt our environment. And then, so we don't say the Japanese Navy, well, we say that Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. So we have been we have been working together with them, and then so this started in 1999 and also 2000. So we have been working together with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, and then we have collaborated with the Japanese Maritime Defense Force regarding counter-piracy. And then also when we look at the Senkaku Islands, the Japanese Coast Guard is at the forefront, but at the same time, we need to have that partnership with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. So this already has been established. And also collaboration and also cooperation were not really that important in the past, but this situation has changed. So our partnership is definitely seamless now. So in terms of control and command, there is a language in the Japanese Self-Defense Force Act of the Japanese government that the defense minister can certify contingency that can mobilize certain functions of ours as well.
情報共有
Therefore, the cooperation in terms of information sharing really is extremely important for us.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. We have just a couple of minutes remaining. I have some questions that we received upon registration that I'll ask those to the panelists. First, to Admiral Ishii, what were the 2 or 3 most significant events in international relations during your assignment as Commandant or Vice Commandant?
はい
Yes, I would like to mention 2 things. One is, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. and Japan Coast Guard cooperation. Just as I mentioned in my presentation, there was a memorandum of understanding in 2020, and then it was revised. And a lot of activities happened because of this. So we were a lot of cooperation from bilateral and unilateral, and we were able to further expand that. The other one is the international initiatives, the resumption of it. COVID has disrupted, however, it was really a big damage. But in Asia and North Asia, there was a ministerial meetings that happened, and then also last year there was a Tokyo's ministerial meeting, and then also there was other Coast Guard leaders that meetings took place. So these are really good progress that I believe.
Fantastic. And then the last question is to both of you, actually, and it's what kind of actions and moves are expected to achieve rule of law in the Pacific Ocean?
I would simply define that as, a shared commitment to upholding rules-based order and a willingness to hold individuals or hold entities accountable when that failure or that breach happens. You can go down a number of different sort of paths on what that looks like, but at the end of the day, we have international standards that must be upheld, and if you fail to meet those standards, there needs to be accountability.
In terms of rule of law, especially in the maritime area, I would like to think about what needs to happen. So nation and other actors are subject to different treaties and other rules, international rules. And but if they deviate from that, then that is a undesirable situation. We need to remove this type of situations. And in other words, the attempt to change the status quo by force is something that we need to change. Unfortunately, there are many attempts to change the status quo by force. If we look around this world, it really is hard for just one nation to control the situation. So, the importance of rule of law is something that needs to be really shared as a shared recognition among the like-minded countries. And if this type of attempt to change the status quo by force, this kind of consequence will happen. This is the sort of the formula that we need to present, and this is something that we need to present to the world.
Very much. Unfortunately, that rounds out our time, but I'd like to please thank our distinguished guests for a really excellent first panel to kickstart the conversation. Admiral Ishii, Rear Admiral Argine, thank you very much.